Okay, those are announcements for this week. I'm going to show a video now. This is a compilation of True Father's words. And if I didn't already mention it, this week we are celebrating the 7th anniversary of Reverend Moon's passing. And so it's really a celebration of his life and his legacy, which is a great way to wrap up our sermon series as well. So let's start off with this video, and please enjoy.
Beautiful words. Thank you. Today, as Pastor Donia shared, we're going to be celebrating the life of Reverend Moon, our founder, and his legacy. And there's a lot to it. Obviously, cannot really cover all of it in a very short time. But I'm going to try to cover what I feel I can this morning. As you can see from the words, I think that there's just so much there that Reverend Moon tried to convey in his life, the way he lived, the way he interacted with people, that even if we didn't know anything else about his life, there's so much that we could learn from. But I'm going to spend a little bit of time just sharing a little bit about his life, and then not just the accomplishments, but also what he taught us as well. So I'm going to start off. Reverend Moon was born in January 6, 1920, in a little humble home in what is now North Korea. And at that time, Korea was under Japanese occupation. Let me think here. I think there was 13 children raised in that little home there. So hard to imagine, but you got to do what you got to do, right? I'm going to skip forward a little bit. There's a lot about stories that we've heard about his childhood, but Reverend Moon had a really impactful experience with Jesus when he was 16 years old. And he writes about it in his autobiography. And I know that many of you have heard this before, but I also know that some of you have not. And I feel like one way or the other, this was a turning point in Reverend Moon's life. This was, in a sense, the beginning of all the things that we're going to talk about later in the message that he did, all started from this moment. So please follow along with me. When I was 16, we experienced the tragedy of having 5 of my younger siblings die in a single year. No words could describe the heartbreak of our parents in losing 5 of their 13 children in such a short time. The suffering of one family seemed connected to the suffering of the nation and of the world. I was increasingly troubled to see the wretched situation of the Korean people under Japan's increasingly tyrannical rule. People didn't have enough to eat. They were sometimes forced to take grass, tree bark, and whatever else they could find and boil these for food. There seemed to be no end to wars around the world. I couldn't comprehend the series of strange events or the fact that tragic events were happening to good people. Seeing the bones of my grandfather had inspired me to start asking questions about life and death. And the series of unusual events in and around our home caused me to hang on to religion. The word of God I was hearing in church, however, was not sufficient by itself to give me the clear answers I was seeking. To relieve the frustrations in my heart, I naturally began to immerse myself in prayer. Who am I? Where did I come from? What is the purpose of life? What happens to people when they die? Is there a world of the eternal soul? Does God really exist? Is God really all-powerful? If he is, why does he just stand by and watch the sorrows of the world? If God created this world, did he also create the suffering that is in the world? What will bring an end to Korea's tragic occupation by Japan? What is the meaning of the suffering of the Korean people? Why do human beings hate each other, fight, and start wars? My heart was filled with these serious and fundamental questions. No one could easily answer them for me, so my only option was to pray. Prayer helped me to find solace. Whenever I laid out the anguishing problems in my heart to God, all of my suffering and sorrow vanished and my heart felt at ease. I began spending more and more time in prayer to the point that eventually I began praying through the night all the time. As a result, I had a rare and precious experience in which God answered my prayers. That day will always remain as the most cherished memory of my life, a day I can never forget. It was the night before Easter in the year I turned 16. I was on Mount Myodu praying all night and begging God in tears for answers. Why did he create a world so filled with sorrow and despair? Why was the all-knowing and all-powerful God leaving the world in such pain? What should I do for my tragic homeland? I wept in tears as I asked these questions repeatedly. Early Easter morning, after I had spent the entire night in prayer, Jesus appeared before me. He appeared in an instant, like a gust of wind, and said to me, God is in great sorrow because of the pain of humankind. You must take on a special mission on earth, having to do with heaven's work. I was simultaneously overcome with fear so great, I felt I might die, and gratitude so profound, I felt I might explode. Jesus spoke clearly about the work I would have to do. His words were extraordinary, having to do with saving humanity from its suffering and bringing joy to God. That day I saw clearly the sorrowful face of Jesus. I heard his voice clearly. The experience of witnessing the manifestation of Jesus caused my body to shake violently, like a quaking aspen's leaves trembling in a strong breeze. So that was the beginning, in a way, of Reverend Moon's journey. Really understanding, okay, there is a purpose, a special calling on my life. And then, of course, afterwards, he had to figure out, well, how do I actually live my life? How do I actually fulfill this calling that God and Jesus have asked of me? Which is not an easy thing to figure out when you're a 16-year-old young person. So, over Reverend Moon's life, he did many, many, many different things. And frankly, as I was preparing for this sermon, there was so much just in the way of practical accomplishments that I could talk, if I knew enough about it, I could talk for hours and hours and hours and probably not put a dent in it. You could probably just cover like 1% of all the actual practical things that he did in his life for humanity. So yeah, obviously I'm not going to do that. But I would like to highlight some things at least, because I think that they're really worth mentioning and they really reflect the kind of person that he was. He spent a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of energy and money to invest into, all areas of culture, all areas of the world. He didn't limit himself just to the realm of religion. He also was involved in politics. He was also involved in feeding the poor. He was also involved in bringing together politicians. He was involved in fighting communism. He was involved in bringing together leaders of different faiths, interfaith, different religions. He was involved in bringing together scientists. He was involved in the arts, ballet, music, movies, sports. Anyway, I'm just going to kind of cover a few of these things. And, maybe some of you might recognize some of these pictures that I'm going to be sharing. Anyway, one of the things that Reverend Moon did later on in his life is he started a church. And that's kind of where we were born. Our local Colorado Family Church started here. This was the first Family Federation Church, first Unification Church. It was a little cardboard hut with water flowing on the ground. And it was very humble beginning, but at that time, actually, nobody really had that much better. Korea was very, poor. But that was kind of how it started. Now, if you go to Korea and you visit some of our churches' buildings and sites, we can see these amazing structures, these amazing monuments, like this one here at Cheonpyeong Lake, that it's just amazing to consider that just within the lifetime of our founder, within 50, 60 years, this could be just one part of what we have. If you ever go to a workshop in Las Vegas, Divine Principle Workshop, you'll see this beautiful IPEC building, International Peace Education Center. And it's just a fantastic place that's built really to be able to welcome even like international dignitaries and VIPs and things like that. This was my daughter actually really would love to learn Korean ballet or Korean folk dancing. This is called the Little Angels. And back in the day, after the war, Korea, very few people knew much about Korea. And there wasn't really anybody who was going around sharing about Korea's beautiful culture. And so our church actually was one of the first to start this Little Angels dance group that's still going on today. And it's a beautiful expression of Korean dance. If you ever have an opportunity to see them live, it's really, they rarely come to Denver, but if they ever do, or if you have a chance to visit them in another state or another country, it's really, there's such a beautiful harmony of colors and dancing and music and smiles. These are, I think, mostly like middle and high school students. This is the International Conference on the Unity of the Sciences. So Reverend Moon believed that also scientists should come together of all different branches of society, all different kinds of science come together under the common banner of, one family under God, under, how can we help to create a better world? How can we see, as scientists, how can we work to build a better world? This is Paraguay. Reverend Moon recognized that there's so much beauty in the natural world, in our world, but we've destroyed a lot of it. And so he made a lot of effort in his life to seek out places where we could try to preserve natural beauty, and also at the same time feed people who are hungry and teach farming practices. And this is actually a celebration they did a couple years ago where they had put a lot of effort into learning how to farm fish and grow food in this area where it was very hard to grow many kinds of commonly used food. And so I think the mayor came out, or maybe even the president of Paraguay, I'm not even sure, and they did like a kind of a fish releasing. They released tens of thousands of fish into the wild. And this is in a different country, in a different part of the world, and we don't really think about it so much. But these were the kind of things that Reverend Moon, when he traveled around the world, he took note of. What are the needs? What are the needs of the people in this part of the world? And what could I do to address those needs? This is the Universal Ballet, another area where Reverend Moon invested into the arts and tried to bring God's perspective into all areas of society, including ballet. This is American Freedom Coalition, AFC. This is the previous, I'm going to say, president of Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, and his wife. And Reverend Moon went there when communism was big and it was taking over the world. And he talked to them about God. He talked to them about how they should be leading the Soviet Union and Russia. They actually became very good friends afterwards. This is MEPI, Middle East Peace Initiative. Actually, Adoni and I were talking earlier how actually we're both kind of sad that we never had the opportunity, or we never took the opportunity to go and participate in one of these, because our movement organized many, many trips for interreligious leaders to go to the Middle East and to hold rallies and to meet the different leadership of Israel and the Arab world, and talk about how we can help to resolve the ongoing conflict in the Middle East between the Christians, the Jews, and the Muslims. And we made a lot of relationships with very influential people in the Middle East. And we don't do them anymore, but there was a time where we were doing them regularly. And it was also an opportunity to go and see many historical religious sites that you don't normally get to. I mean, if you go out of your way, you can go and see them still, but it was just a really precious opportunity that I feel like we kind of missed out on. But Reverend Moon recognized that religious wars are the worst kind of wars. They're the most dangerous kind of wars, and there's so much, thousands of years of resentment between religions. And even though you can invest a lot into politics and you can invest a lot into making the world better in different ways. If you can't resolve the tension and the conflict between religions, then you can only go so far. So he invested a lot into this, recognized how important it was. This was the Interreligious and International Peace Council. So another effort to bring together people of different religions. He also brought together many people of, that were in politics and business and anyway, so on and so forth. Like, I know that I'm at the end of this, you're going to be like, what about that? And what about that? And what about that? And we'll be like, well, there were so many things we couldn't possibly cover them all. This is Women's Federation for World Peace. This was an organization that our founders started that was primarily focused on raising women leaders. And this was kind of before the time. I would say that Reverend Moon was really a person who was really before his time. A lot of the ideas that he brought up were ideas that are very common now, like women's leadership, but this was 40 years ago, 30 years ago. So maybe not as common of a thing. But also very different than, per se, maybe the feminist movement. The idea behind Women's Federation was that, women are innate leaders in their own right, but they don't need to be in competition with men. We don't need to put men down, but women can be leaders on their own, and they have their unique ability to lead in their own way. These were One World Crusade. These were speeches and presentations and campaigns going on all around America that Reverend Moon was really speaking out about. Christianity is in crisis. Many people are leaving Christianity. Many people are losing faith. Many young people are struggling so much with how they should be living their life and if they really believe in spiritual values. So he was really going around the country really trying to wake up people and say, hey, we need a new revival, in a sense. This was a university, just one of many buildings. This is a large university in Korea called Sun Moon University, where you can go and you can get a major in true love. I don't know what that actually means, to be honest, but you can do it. Where else can you do that? But you can also get majors in other things too that I think are probably more career-oriented. Reverend Moon really believed in influence, that you can influence the world through media, movies, music. So we many years ago, back when it was run down, we bought the Manhattan Center, which is a very well-known, I guess what you call it, a venue, like a concert, like a studio, usable for many things. As you can see here, they did America's Got Talent there. They've had banquets and presidential campaign celebrations and all kinds of different things, obviously concerts and things like that here as well. And then one of the most iconic buildings in New York was the New Yorker. And we bought it when it was falling apart. And a lot of our members invested their hours and hours of heart and work into restoring the building. And now it's a beautiful, beautiful place. And also the headquarters of our church is located inside as well. So if you ever have a chance to go to New York, go to the New Yorker. Be like, hey, that's a part of who we are. It's really cool. Reverend Moon was also really big on healing interracial divide through interracial marriages, what we call the blessing. And he did it in a way that most people wouldn't. He did it through mass weddings, and we have the Guinness record on largest mass weddings. I don't know how big this one was, but right now, once a year, you can go to Korea and you can participate in one of these. And it's an opportunity. It's a lot of people will go on and still have their normal traditional wedding, but the blessing is an opportunity to dedicate your marriage to God and to say, we're not just getting married for ourselves, but we are committing to a life for God. We are committing our marriage and our relationship we're going to put God first and foremost in our life. and we're going to live our life for God. And so this is just a beautiful example of one of these ceremonies where all these couples are participating, and they are affirming their marriage vows by saying yes. And it's pretty cool. One of the things that you read about if you read Reverend Moon's autobiography is he talks about how, in reality, there is so much like resentment, or there's so much anger that people hold on to towards people of other colors, towards people of other races. I mean, it's just not the kind of thing that you can make go away just because you say, hey, we don't want racism anymore, we don't want bigotry anymore, we don't want prejudice anymore. Those things don't just disappear. So he's saying, if you intermarry those cultures, then, and those families have beautiful children, then you can't hate your own grandchildren. That was kind of the idea. And many of those, many people in this room committed through this ceremony. It's really beautiful. This was another thing that Reverend Moon was really promoting before he passed away, like last, decade or so before he passed away, was the Peace Road. He was always thinking, how do we bring the world together? How do we bring people together? How do we bridge the divides? And this was one idea that he came up with. It was called the Peace Road. The idea was that if you create a bridge or a tunnel under the Bering Strait, or over the Bering Strait, between Russia and Alaska, you can effectively make one highway that goes around the whole world. And the idea behind that was, well, if there's one highway that goes around the whole world, then it will make it a lot easier for people to go from one place to another place. It will bring the world a little bit closer together. And actually, other people, since his passing, have started promoting this idea. And I don't have any doubt that eventually, someday, we will see something like this happen. Soccer. Reverend Moon loved soccer so much. And what he loved about soccer was that anywhere you go in the world, just about, people love soccer. Some sports are complicated, right? Football, basketball. Well, football's not so complicated, but like basketball, take for example basketball or hockey, or you need a decent amount of equipment. You need the right, the hoops and the courts, and hockey you need ice. That doesn't exist everywhere. But soccer, all you really need is a ball, something you can kick around, and something to mark off as a goal. And so many, many places around the world, even the most poorest of countries, people play soccer, and people love soccer. I mean, the love of soccer is almost, you can't quantify it. It's really amazing how much people love soccer. Like in Colorado, people love football, right? People love the Broncos, but it doesn't compare to how much people love soccer, And even me saying football, that's not really football, is insulting to people, right? Who don't use that word for that purpose. So Reverend Moon was like, hey, so many people love soccer. This is a great way to bring the world together. If we can create more focus on like a heavenly kind of soccer, bring God into soccer, bring the world together with soccer. And he even got Pele on board. If you know soccer, Pele is really a famous soccer player. And they created this Peace Cup together. It was a tournament for soccer where people from all, it's kind of like the World Cup, but a little bit different. And it's not, to my knowledge, going on anymore. But it was something that he started because, like everything that he started, it was like, how do I bring people together? How do I bridge how do I focus people away from what divides us and what we don't have in common to what we do have in common, what we do love mutually, and focus on those things? Not an easy thing to do, I tell you. Causa. So Reverend Moon, especially during the time of the Soviet Union, really spent a lot of energy and focus on promoting against communism. So Causa was formed for this purpose, also Victory Over Communism, giving speeches, going around and talking, which actually made him very, very, very unpopular amongst the communists, as you can imagine. They're not the kind of people that you want not like you, right? So there was assassination attempts. He became very unpopular. Lots of rumors went around about him, trying to discredit him and his name. But that was what he believed in. He believed that communism is a God-denying philosophy that will eventually lead to ruin and suffering. And he was right. So he campaigned strongly against that. I thought for sure we have to include a picture of his family. This is an older picture, obviously, so a lot of those kids are older and there's more grandkids and so on and so forth, but this is a picture of his family. They had many kids, many grandkids. Professor's World Peace Academy, yet another example of his heart to try to bring together people of all walks of life, so including professors, teachers, educators. Reverend Moon was put in jail 6 times. He was in prison 6 times, and he never did anything wrong. But he stood up for what he believed in, and because of that, oftentimes he was unpopular. And one of those times he was put in a death camp, where he was expected to die, and many people did. This is a picture of him in prison here in America, because he became very unpopular at one point, and a lot of people wanted to shut him up, and they ended up putting him in prison over some made-up tax fraud charges. And he went, and he actually won over a lot of people in the prison. Actually, a lot of people who were in the prison with him really looked up to him, actually. It was kind of funny. But he said that actually the American prison was the easiest, because back in the day when he went to prison under communist rule, they would beat you, they would torture you, they would try to kill you. In American prison, they don't do any of that stuff. They give you food, you can do whatever you want, and no one's going to try to harm you, at least not physically. But it was still sad, because as you can see, he's not like a young person anymore. For a good man like him to have to go to prison 6 times, I would think for myself after the first once or twice, I'd be like, I'm getting a little tired of this. It's like, why is this happening to me? But he always had a good attitude, and he always looked for what is God trying to do through this. And actually, he did a lot. As you can see here, actually, when Reverend Moon was put in prison in Danbury, then actually many religious leaders came out, and they said, hey, this isn't fair. You put a good man in prison, and these charges are not even legitimate. And they said, if you can do that to Reverend Moon, you could do that to anybody. So they actually stood up and said, this isn't okay. And you can see his daughter there, and different religious leaders of different groups came together to say, we're not going to allow this. This isn't okay. And that was, I don't know if it was the beginning, but it was kind of the beginnings of our ACLC, American Clergy Leadership Conference, like interreligious work in America. I'm going to get that to that in a minute. Also, Reverend Moon invested in the martial arts. We actually created our own style of martial arts. But also, he would make effort to bring together different kinds of people, different martial arts. This is the Martial Arts Federation for World Peace. Very common theme, World Peace, Federation for World Peace. This is also another area that Reverend Moon was really ahead of his time, was the seafood industry. Now, seafood is always big in island countries, right? Japan, many different countries where they're surrounded by oceans, seafood is kind of a big deal. But in America, seafood was not really a big thing, at least not 40 years ago or 50 years ago. Now it's huge, right? All kinds of seafood businesses everywhere, sushi, poke, sashimi, seaweed, all this stuff is commonplace now. But I remember when I was a kid growing up in Wyoming, as one of the only Asian people, period, I brought some seaweed to my class for show and tell, and all the kids were like, what is this? It was like, and I thought, oh, this is so cool, right? This is seaweed wrapped in rice paper. And the rice paper is paper, but it also dissolves in your mouth. And, it's so cool, right? But for them, it was like, oh, gross. I got all kinds of weird looks and, just weren't ready for it. Maybe they're still not ready for it. Wyoming isn't very culturally diverse. There's one thing I appreciate about being in Denver. But even in Wyoming, you can go to a sushi restaurant now, which didn't exist when I was growing up. And you can probably get fresh fish to some degree, which you really couldn't when I was growing up, which was, I think, really painful for my mom. So Reverend Moon also recognized that there's only so much land in the world. And growing food on land has limitations. You can only grow so much food on land because we also need the land to build buildings on and live on and et cetera, right? So he was saying that we need to invest into the ocean. The ocean has a much more abundant space, and you can, instead of spending all this money and all this effort to, grow a cow, feed a cow, and butcher a cow, and all the things you have to do to have meat or beef, he said, fish lay thousands of eggs at a time. And you could be much more successful at feeding the hungry, feeding the world, and also preparing for the future if we invest into the seafood industry. And so, he predicted many years ago that the seafood industry would be huge. And now it is. But that was, like back then, it was like, well, if you say so, He even invested into trying to develop technology to create fish protein powder because, fish has only so long of a shelf life, right? Fish actually decomposes very quickly. You don't want to, you have to ice it right away, otherwise it starts going real bad. But he figured if we can make a dry powder, then it could last a long time. He's always thinking, well, how do we solve problems? How do we, thinking about what's the future going to be? What are the future problems going to be? Just an amazing mindset. World Culture and Sports Festival. I remember going to one of these when I was a teenager in Washington. There was they brought together people of all different kinds of sports, especially, also martial arts, and it was kind of like a little mini Olympics. It was really cool. But always trying to, do these things that we also already have in some sense in the world, but also under the banner of God, bringing together people, healing divisions. And I think this is the last one here. This is ACLC. So this is actually a picture from a couple months ago. These are some of my favorite people in the world. The middle guy with the microphone, his name's Reverend Abernathy. He has a large church, might be a mega church, I don't know what you would call it, in Atlanta. And he's just a fantastic Christian pastor. I love the guy. And he actually loves what we're doing. He's like, I want to come and visit you guys. And I'm so embarrassed because he's got a mega church out there in Atlanta with like a live stream and like a stage with lights, like a full band. And it's like, he's got staff and it's like the whole, it's like what you would get if you were to go to, Flatirons or some of these other big churches, like the full production. And he's like, I want to come to your church and check out what you're doing because I've watched your sermons and I hear so many good things about you. I'm like, all right, maybe in like 5 years, when we've got things a little bit more developed, I will invite you over. I don't think he's going to listen. He's just going to show up one of these days. But he's just a fantastic person. And these pastors, Reverend Abernathy, Reverend Edwards, Archbishop Stallings, Bishop Jones, these people have made so much effort to support our movement and to say, hey, how can we work together to bring together Christianity? How can we work together to build a better world? That's what God would want us to do. That's what Jesus would want us to do. They're just amazing people, some of my favorite people. And I think that started soon after the whole Danbury incident. So that's, like I said, I know I missed a lot. And I know there's many of you who are like, what about this, and what about that, and what about that, and what about that? And I'm sorry if I offended you by leaving out something important. It wasn't my intention, but there's so much. Like, I think I probably covered maybe a quarter of them, to be honest. But I can't just spend the whole sermon talking about showing pictures of things, and talking about that. I mean, I guess I could, but that's not what I was going to do. But I think that it's important to take a few minutes to talk about the other side of things. There was a lot of things that Reverend Moon did, right? There was a lot of initiatives that he started, a lot of programs that he created. And I think that in and of itself is pretty amazing. Like, just a one person, you know? Of course, his wife, you know, Mrs. Moon, who's still alive, is carrying on that legacy and doing a lot of things on her own and starting also new organizations. But just like to imagine that just started from one person's experience with Jesus when he was 16. That created all of that. And also all of our family churches all over the country, all over the world, represented in most countries of the world. I mean, yeah, we have problems, but like, you know, you got to give the guy some credit. That's amazing. So, you know, he was a humanitarian and he was a philanthropist, but he wasn't just those things. As you could read in his sharing from his autobiography, he was a person who sought after spiritual truth. I would say first and foremost. And just as important are the things that he did, are the things that he taught us and the questions that he answered. So I don't know how many of you saw this on social media. I know that not all of you are on social media, but a prominent member that used to write a lot of songs for Hillsong came out and shared some things online that are kind of controversial. His name's Matt Sampson, or Mart Sampson, might be a typo. And he said some things, and I'm just going to kind of quote some of the things he said. How can God be love, yet send 4 billion people to a place all because they don't believe? No one talks about it. I want genuine truth, not just the I believe it kind of truth. Science keeps piercing the truth of every religion. If most of humankind had a choice, would we not rid the world of the scourge of cancer or sickness and disease? But the majority of why doesn't God do such a thing? Of course, there is an answer to this question, but the majority of a typical Christian's life is not spent considering these things, he said. Questions such as these remain in the too hard basket. It's really interesting. As someone who's written he wrote dozens of songs for Hillsong. And if you don't know Hillsong, Hillsong is one of the most famous worship bands / professional Christian bands in the world. They've produced lots and lots of music that's gone mainstream. If you remember, we've played the song Oceans a couple times. That's a song by Hillsong. They've made many other original songs. And he wrote many of them. And he's questioning his faith. He's questioning, why are things the way they are? Why are there contradictions and discrepancies in the Bible? Is another thing that he said. Marty, thank you. So I think this is very interesting because I think actually a lot of people are thinking about these kinds of things, even though they may not necessarily be saying it. And there's a lot of legitimate questions that I'm so grateful I don't have to struggle with those things because our faith and the divine principle answers those questions. At least it does for me. And I have to credit Reverend Moon with that. He sought out and discovered these answers. He taught us. He answered questions like, what is the nature and character of God? Many people say, we can't know God. He's too far away. Actually, we can. We can know God. Why did God create this world? And why did God create me? What was Jesus' true mission? And why does he have to come back again? Can science and religion ever be reconciled? Can they ever be united? Why does God allow suffering? It's a question many people have stated, many people have had. Is there a goal of history? And if so, what is it? And what is the true nature of life after death? And he taught us that fulfillment and happiness, like many of the things that we talked about in our sermon series, right? He taught us that fulfillment and happiness comes through living for the sake of others. He taught us that we are one family under God. He taught us that the family is the building block of the kingdom of heaven. And he taught us that God is working through all religions and all people of conscience to bring about a better world. And actually, God has been working through religion to create a world that doesn't need religion. He taught us a clearer understanding of the Bible and how it should be interpreted. You can take any verse from the Bible and, oh yeah, that's a good verse. I'm going to apply that to my life. But if you look at the whole of the Bible, how does it all fit together? How does it all make sense? What was the purpose of this and what was the purpose of that? Why did God have to do things a certain way? He showed us how it all fits together. It's crazy. He showed us that God's relationship with us is as that of a parent and a child. God is our parent. And that God's ultimate plan is to save all of his children, not just a few who believe a certain way. And he taught us that God grieves and suffers with humanity, and that he is working tirelessly behind the scenes to save his children. Most of these teachings and understanding of the Bible is shared with us in the divine principle. So if you have not already taken the opportunity to study and learn the divine principle, I would really encourage you to do that. It's important to note that even Jesus shared with us that this kind of thing needed to happen, you know? He said, I have said this to you in figures. The hour is coming when I shall no longer speak to you in figures, but tell you plainly of the Father. But that never happened in the Bible, so it's still yet to happen at some point. Might as well be now. The divine principle also shares some parts, with including the Bible, says that due to the disbelief of the people of his time, Jesus died on the cross without being able to teach all he had on his heart. As he said, if I have told you earthly things and you do not believe me, how can you believe if I tell you heavenly things? What is more, Jesus added, I have yet many things to say to you, but you cannot bear them now. Disclosing how sorrowful he was about the inability of even his closest disciples to receive all that he wanted to share. And then lastly, John 16:13 says, when the Spirit of truth comes down the road, he will guide you into all truth. For he will not speak on his own authority, but whatever he hears, he will speak, and he will declare to you the things that are to come. So Reverend Moon passed away 7 years ago. 7 years ago from Friday. And, he, as we saw, he accomplished and shared so much. It's hard to believe that in one person's lifetime you could accomplish so much. His philosophy was to work harder than anyone else so that he could accomplish in 1 year, and he literally said this, 1 year, what it would normally take a person an entire lifetime to accomplish. He was a really driven person. He was driven by his love for God and his love for God's children. He often only got 2 hours of sleep a night, which is attested to by people who were in his security or other people who knew him. He saw all the world's children as his own children. And, we can learn a lot from his life. And even when he passed away, he was 92 years old. He still worked hard every day. What more can I do for God? What more is there left unaccomplished that I can accomplish? And it's very impressive when we look at his life. But we have to recognize that Reverend Moon didn't do those things for his own glory, his own legacy, or for recognition. He did those things because that was what he felt that God wanted him to do, but also he wanted to show us the way to live our lives, to pass on the torch to us. And we would do well to learn from his example and think about and act on how do we make a legacy in our own lives, even just to invest into one of those little things that Reverend Moon invested into in his life. So today, we're celebrating his life because he had an amazing life, And I know that for a lot of people, there's a lot of sadness surrounding his passing, but there's a lot of joy also to recognize what an amazing legacy he left, what an amazing example he had. And so today, for lunch, we have japchae, right? And for those of you who don't know japchae so well, or even who do, Reverend Moon, this is one of his favorite dishes. He talks about it in his autobiography. And this is a very traditional Japanese dish made with Korean, sorry. Almost made it all the way through without a major slip up. Korean dish made with sweet potato noodles and toppings and things. And I hope that as you're eating it, you can remember our Reverend Moon, our true father, and his legacy. And we can, it's a simple celebration, but celebrate together the life of a great person. Thank you, and please join me in prayer. Good morning, our most beloved Heavenly Parent. All of us here today are here because of our beloved Reverend Moon, our beloved true father, who gave his whole life without condition, without ever holding back, because he recognized to the depth of his heart your suffering. And he knew that in his life, he wanted to take some of the burden off of your shoulders by working to build a peaceful world, by working to resolve some of the anger and the resentment that exists in this world. And he lived that way. There was never enough time. And so he just didn't sleep many times. And he would speak for hours, and he was always doing new things. And many times some of those things didn't work out. But he never stopped giving up. He never stopped investing into what he really believed in, into giving of himself to you. What a wonderful son. What a wonderful child of God, and an example for all of us. Heavenly Parent, I pray that even though you don't expect us to live like him, he sacrificed a lot and he suffered a lot. But we can take a piece of his life, a piece of his legacy, and think, how can I further that? How can I take that baton and continue it? How can I grow it? Heavenly Parent, there are so many needs in this world, and he recognized it, and he worked. He gave everything of his life to try to meet those needs, and many more that we'll probably never know. We're so grateful for this man. Everything we have is because of him in our church and in our movement. I pray that we can create a kind of church that really mirrors and really inherits the love that he had and the spirit that he had, that it can be an inspiration to the people of this world who are looking or who are searching in darkness, who are doubting because they can't accept what they've heard, like this young man with Hillsong, Heavenly Parent. Let's work to renew people's faith in you. Heavenly Parent, there are many people in this world who have lost faith in their fellow man or have lost faith in you for different reasons, and many of them are good reasons, Heavenly Parent. But I hope that we can work as a community and as individuals to renew that faith and to bring your children closer to you little by little, every step, every day. And I offer this prayer in my name, Michael and Adonia Hendrick, a blessed central family. Amen and adieu.